The biggest point that I want to bring out here is rats that had mifepristone alone had a full abortion. 100% of the time, they did not have any live fetuses at the end of gestation. Rats administered mifepristone and then progesterone showed an initiated abortion and then a recovery that led to live fetuses with normal heart rates comparable to those of a normal pregnancy at the end of gestation. That's the key takeaway, if you will.
Hello and welcome to Caring for Both, a curbside consult series by the American Association of Pro-Life Obstetricians and Gynecologists, or APLOG. On this podcast, we bring on experts to provide insights that can help medical professionals to build a life-affirming practice and a life-affirming career. We release new episodes every Thursday. I'm your host for today, Miriam Diallo, and for this episode, I'm extremely excited to bring on a guest who can provide a bit of an update to an episode that we did in our first season. In fact, it was our second ever episode with Dr. George Delgado, who spoke about abortion pill reversal, or APR, offered an overview of what it is, and responded to some critiques of this treatment. Since then, in the past year or so, the topic of APR really hasn't gone out of the public discourse. In fact, we've seen 3 different states in the news trying to ban the practice. And we've also seen some important new research that can provide the medical community with insights as to APR and how it works. So today I have on a guest who can provide that update. That's Dr. Stephen Sammut. Dr. Sammut is currently a full professor of psychology at Franciscan University in Steubenville, Ohio, where he teaches and is also actively involved in research. His research interests lie in the utilization of behavioral models and combined experimental techniques to investigate the interaction between the endocrine, immune, and nervous systems and their roles in CNS development, functioning, and psychopathology. At this time, one of his primary areas of research is seeking to establish a preclinical model addressing the reversal of the abortive effects of mifepristone with natural progesterone, which is basically what APR is. In July of 2023, so just a few months ago, Dr. Sammut published a study exploring progesterone-mediated reversal of mifepristone-induced pregnancy termination in a rat model. It was published in Scientific Reports, a peer-reviewed open-access journal published by Nature Portfolio. Dr. Sammut, thank you so much for being here.
And thank you so much for having me on. Thank you.
Sweet. My first question, just to dive in and to potentially give a little bit of a refresher to our audience, can you offer a very quick overview of what APR is and how it works?
Absolutely. So APR, abortion pill reversal, refers to the process where a woman potentially regretting her abortion and wishing to do something about it is administered doses of progesterone in order to reverse the pregnancy termination that has been initiated, and this happens, at a relatively successful rate. I believe in humans it is at about 70%. So it's basically giving an opportunity to a woman that regrets her abortion to have a second chance at stopping that abortion process, but it needs to be early on.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sammut, for that concise explanation. And to our listeners who have not yet caught up on the episode with Dr. Delgado, that will provide a more in-depth overview of what APR is. And you can find it on our website, aaplog.org, in our podcast page, as well as on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast apps. Now, diving into your most recent study, Dr. Sammut, can you tell us a little bit more about what its purpose was and what its design is?
Okay, so the reason why the study was really necessary was because of all of the questions that have arisen and criticisms that continue to arise pertaining to the abortion pill reversal. Realistically, it has to be admitted that the concept of abortion pill reversal is a very simple chemical process, a very simple logical chemical process that, realistically speaking, does not really need too much evidence to prove. We know this from a chemistry perspective. However, given the questions and criticisms again, one of the things that I sought to do is I wanted to address this aspect in an animal model at a preclinical level. Now, the reason why I do that is because in a preclinical model, in an animal model, we don't have issues with regards to peer pressure or social pressures or even religious pressure. In this case, we're investigating a study at a level in animals that are outside of this, outside of these issues. So in animals, religion, social pressure don't play a role. And if the experiment is designed appropriately, it can address that question. So what my studies sought to do was to investigate whether we could appropriately reverse the initiated abortion. The study was also necessary because the one study that existed before ours administered the mifepristone, administered the progesterone at the same time as mifepristone. In this case, and it was also done very early in pregnancy, and they did not follow through to the end of gestation. So our study sought to investigate all of those aspects, ensuring that the abortion has started, so we have proof that the abortion has started, and then looking at whether the progesterone reverses the initiated abortion. One aspect, if you don't mind, that I would like to explain to the listeners here, I mentioned earlier on that this is a very simplistic, in a way, chemical process. I just want to explain that aspect a bit better, if you don't mind. So, when you've got, in order for the pregnancy to be maintained, you need the hormone progesterone. Progesterone is called an agonist. This is like the key that goes into the door in order to open the door. So progesterone is absolutely necessary. And so in order to produce its effect, progesterone, like the key that goes into the lock, progesterone binds to what's called the receptor. That's the equivalent of the lock. Now, the way the abortion is initiated by mifepristone is mifepristone removes the progesterone from its receptor and blocks it from acting. So it's the equivalent of putting something in front of that lock in order to block the key from going in. And this is how the abortion is initiated. Now, mifepristone is known as an antagonist because it blocks the effects of the natural agonist, which is progesterone. So one of the ways, now another aspect that needs to be kept in mind here is the fact that mifepristone is what's called a reversible and competitive antagonist. What we mean by this is that it doesn't, if we use the key and lock analogy, it doesn't bind and block the keyhole permanently. There is a way of getting it off. And the way we get it off is by administering doses of the progesterone, higher doses of the progesterone to displace it, to remove it from the receptor. So this is, I'm emphasizing this aspect because this is, anybody that studies chemistry will understand that these are simple chemical behaviors that we all study when we are studying chemistry, and they are well known in the chemistry field. So what progesterone is doing is displacing the mifepristone and then binding to the receptor in order to return the system to the pregnant state. So I wanted to investigate all of this and see whether we could replicate this concept in an animal, because here, for sure, we're not going to be observing anything that is of social influence or religious influence. Here we're observing just the pure science of it. We're looking at whether progesterone can actually reverse the process that mifepristone has initiated.
Thank you so much. And that's a really great emphasis on why it's important to have that kind of preclinical model. I'm sure a lot of our audience would find that explanation helpful. So next step, of course, is talk about the results of your study. What were your study's results, and what insights do you think those results provide to the medical community and add to what we already know about APR?
Okay, so in order to answer that question, we first have to understand that when we are doing research preclinically, it is never perfect. No animal model is ever perfect replication of what's going on in humans. In fact, we faced challenges ourselves. We used the rat model, so we used the rat, and the rat's life is significantly compressed relative to that of the human. So we need to keep in mind that no animal model is a perfect replica of what goes on in humans. However, because of the similarity in physiology, one can make extrapolation cautiously in regards to what this would mean in humans. There's a lot of similarity in physiology and even in neurophysiology. So what our results showed. So what we sought to do, as I indicated, is that we wanted to ensure that the abortion has been initiated so that there is no doubt that what we're observing is due to progesterone having an effect. Because if we gave the two drugs together, then we don't know whether the abortion even was initiated. And realistically speaking, we want to mimic what takes place in humans as much as we can. We can't do it perfectly, but as much as we can. And in humans, a woman does not take the progesterone at the same time that she takes the mifepristone. Usually there is a gap of time. So what our results showed is that the rats that had the mifepristone alone, we call this the abortion group or the pregnancy termination group. These rats started showing signs of bleeding and also significant loss of weight. And this loss of weight is not just due to the termination of the pregnancy, it is also due to a distressed behavior and a depression-like behavior. And we talked about this in our initial model when we first published the paper pertaining to an animal model of mifepristone-induced abortion. So we saw a decrease at loss of weight, which was indicative that the pregnancy was terminated and this depression-like behavior. However, in the rats that were administered the mifepristone and then a few minutes later, they were given progesterone. Now, it was around 10 to 15 minutes later in the rat. However, I just want to emphasize that that's equivalent to about 6 to 9 hours in human. So we're not talking about 10 minutes in human time. What we observed there was that these rats showed an initial decrease in their weight and also bleeding, similar to the abortion group. And then they started regaining their weight, indicating that there was a pregnancy that was, the pregnancy was there and the babies continued to grow. So that was one aspect. The other aspect, of course, we wanted to confirm that there were live babies at the end of gestation. And this we did. When you looked at the rats that were administered the abortion drug alone, those rats had an empty uterus. There was nothing in there. The rats that were given the mifepristone and then progesterone had live fetuses in there at the end of gestation in 81% of cases. I'm not saying that it was 100% of cases, but 81% of cases, they had live fetuses in there. And their heart rates were no different from those rats that had a normal pregnancy. That's where we stopped our study at the end of gestation. This is why we called it a preliminary investigation. We wanted to see whether our study actually showed this reversal. And the reason for that, again, is because of the complexity of the squished time, lifetime of the rat. So now we are proceeding with further studies, which we can talk about in a bit. However, the biggest point that I want to bring out here is rats that had mifepristone alone had a full abortion. 100% of the time, they did not have any live fetuses at the end of gestation. Rats administered mifepristone and then progesterone showed an initiated abortion and then a recovery that led to live fetuses with normal heart rates comparable to those of a normal pregnancy at the end of gestation. That's the key takeaway, everyone.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sammut. And I can't believe I haven't mentioned this before, but the link to the study will be in the show notes, so you can review, the whole thing. You can read the whole thing. It is open access. So that's for our audience. And you did mention, you alluded to potential next steps for research. So I'd love to dive into that a little bit more. What's next for APR research, both you personally or any other researchers that you might know of?
The steps that we are going to take next. So, like I said, we called it a preliminary study for a reason. Now we need to investigate, well, what do the offspring look like? Are they healthy? And also, what about the mother after birth? As I said, we had to cut off the point. We had to set a point where we cut off the experiment, because progesterone administration and mifepristone, when you're messing around with these hormones, you don't just affect one process. And there's a lot of processes associated with progesterone, including its impact on lactation, its impact on the capacity to give birth. And all of these aspects needed to be worked out. We have worked them out now, and now we are proceeding with the same experiment, but extended in the sense of we are now going to allow these dams to give birth so that we can follow up on the offspring, make sure that the offspring are healthy and no different from a normal pregnancy, and also follow up on the mothers and ensure, well, what's the mother's behavior? Well, because here again, like I said, I keep on emphasizing this point. We are not looking at social pressure or religious pressure. We are purely looking at a physiological response. How is the mother's behavior following the reversal? Is it any different from a mother that gave birth normally and never underwent any mifepristone administration? So that's where we are going next. Admittedly, beyond this, we have a lot of work that needs to be done, because also related to our first published work pertaining to the abortion model, the negative consequences that we observed deserve additional investigation. When you have a rat showing depression-like behavior and anxiety-like behavior when administered mifepristone and they undergo an abortion, there has to be a neurological consequences to that. And we have the capacity to investigate that aspect, but God willing, that is something that we will be doing in the near future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Sammut, and I'm excited to see how that all pans out. I'm excited to see the next round of studies and potentially to have you back on to explain those. Yeah, and we have a little bit of time, so I'd love to ask on behalf of our listeners who might be interested in getting involved in APR research, do you know of any available opportunities for them to maybe work as a research assistant or an intern in this area?
Great question. I personally would love to say yes. I need more people. There is so much, as we've been talking, there's so much that still needs to be done. And you need a lot of hands in order to be able to do this, but you also need space. One aspect I would say is people should feel free to contact me anytime. If there is a possibility, even within my lab and funding is available, this is a great possibility. However, I just want to kind of give two sides to this. I'm at the preclinical level. So people that contact me should contact me if they're interested in working in the field, in addressing these questions at a preclinical level, which involves, as I said earlier, and I promise they're nice, with the rats. I mean, that sometimes turns people off immediately. However, that's where my preclinical research, that's what my preclinical research involves. So people can contact me if they're interested in preclinical research. At the human level, I would suggest that they would contact Dr. Delgado. He is at the forefront of that aspect, and he would be the better contact in terms of addressing that kind of question in terms of research at the human level. In terms of other labs, to be honest with you, I am not aware of any. Realistically speaking, even the studies that we have published, both of them, were necessary because no other research before this has actually been done that investigates the questions that we did. For example, when we published a study in 2019 pertaining to abortion and its consequences, all of the other studies prior to that, except for one by Russell in 1980 that looked at some negative consequences on breast tissue following a hysterectomy removal of fetuses in the rat. However, prior to that, all of the research was focused on how efficacious the drug is, mifepristone that is, in inducing abortion. There was no interest in looking at what consequences does this have on the mother. So realistically speaking, I have to be honest, and I stand to be corrected. I do not believe that there are other labs around the world even that are conducting the research that we have published in the past few years in 2019 and now with the abortion pill reversal paper that we just published.
That's all very helpful. Thank you so much, Dr. Sammut. And yeah, Dr. Delgado's organization is called Steno Institute, so I'll be sure to put those, the contact info for Steno in the show notes, as well as your contact info as well, so people can reach out to see what's available in terms of positions. So yeah, and we have, just one more question. I'd love to get your thoughts on what's been going on in the news. You might have seen recent efforts by 3 states, there's California, Colorado, and Massachusetts, to stop medical professionals from providing APR each in their own way. California, the Attorney General filed a lawsuit against a chain of pregnancy resource centers that had been providing APR. Colorado passed a law banning it, and then in Massachusetts, the Department of Public Health issued a letter threatening the licensure of medical professionals who provide APR. So what are your thoughts on all of those developments? Is it good for patients? What does it mean for researchers like you?
That's a loaded question, if I may try and unpack it. So my undergraduate degree is actually in pharmacy. First of all, I have to admit that when I see what's going on around me with regards to the free availability of this drug, it really is disturbing, because given the responsibilities that I was taught as a pharmacist in terms of the care that needs to be given to the patient, even as a pharmacist, it was my obligation to even check for drug interactions and ensure, even beyond the doctor, I needed to be on top of that aspect. So all of this seems to be forgotten in this regard. Now, to go to the legislative aspect, first of all, I'd like to indicate, some people may be wondering, how is your research even useful, given you do it on rats? Well, I've already addressed a number of times the fact that there are similarities, first of all, and secondly, that the results can be extrapolated to the human level, and we don't have the other pressures that humans undergo. Our research was actually utilized in Colorado with regards to arguing against I believe it was Senate Bill 23190. So there is the potential. Our research, this is why we do it. We do it for people to utilize it when they're making such arguments. So that's one aspect I want to bring up. Secondly, I really want to encourage the listeners, lay people and doctors alike, be alert and understand the codes of regulation that exist with regards to ethics. These aspects that you are brought up highlight, literally, and I'm sorry, I'm going to be blunt here, crimes against humanity. Because if you look at the Nuremberg Code, which came out of the atrocities that the Nazis did, one of the fundamental aspects that it addresses, and then after the Helsinki Declaration and the Belmont Report, and these are important documents for people to understand and know, all emphasize the necessity for the person to be fully aware of what's being done to them. Therefore, when you have legislation being passed, preventing even a doctor from informing a person of a possibility that could be given to them in terms of the possibility of reversing an initiated abortion, the possibility of reversing, you are depriving the patient of being able to consent appropriately. And consent is one of the biggest aspects of the Nuremberg Code. You're preventing the person from consenting appropriately because you haven't given them the full information. And realistically speaking, we are talking about a chemical process that is simple, basic chemistry. This is anybody that has studied chemistry, probably even at a high school level, understands the concepts of agonists and antagonists and how they work. We are not talking about rocket science here. This is simple, basic chemistry. So when courts and legislation come out and legislate against such a process, it is actually in itself a crime against humanity, because you are depriving the potential of a person being informed fully in order for them to be able to make a legitimate, free will, autonomous, which the Belmont report emphasizes a lot, autonomous decision. So this in itself is a crime. Those laws are crimes in themselves.
Thank you so much for your thoughts, Dr. Sammut, and for the really informative explanation of your study.
Thank you. And thank you so much for the opportunity to be able to share the research. And like I said, people can feel free to contact me if they have further questions.
Absolutely. And yeah, I'll be sure to put your contact info in the show description. And thank you so much to our listeners as well for joining us today. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to give us a like and subscribe to our channel so you can keep up with all the different episodes that we have coming up. If you're listening on a podcast app like Spotify or Apple Podcasts, you can give us a 5-star review. And we are very excited to see you next week for our next episode.